Force. Force is the result of an object's interaction with another object. It is either the push or the pull on the object. Forces only exist as a result of the reaction.
So, is gravity a force?
Yes, Maddie, there are two types of forces. Gravity is a field force, meaning that the objects don't need to be in contact for the force to occur. Other field forces include electrical and magnetic forces.
So, the other kind of force is contact force, where the force comes from an object being in contact with another object, like frictional forces, tensional forces, normal forces, air-resistant forces, and applied
As
forces.
the ball touches the lacrosse stick, it is an example of a contact force because the ball would have continued moving if not for the lacrosse stick. As the ball descends towards the ground, it is an example of a field force because the gravity makes the ball move towards the ground. Newton's first law is the reason objects in motion will only stop after hitting something or having contact with a force, and objects need a force to get them going in the first place, and balance forces in the environment determine the consistency of this. So, an object moving at a constant velocity will stay moving at a constant velocity without acceleration?
Yes, Sarah. Objects have something called inertia, which is objects resistant to unbalanced force or a change in velocity.
So does everyone and everything have the same amount of inertia?
No, actually, inertia is determined by an object's mass. The more mass an object has, the more inertia they possess.
Gee willikers! The soccer ball is at rest until an unbalanced force will move it, like my hand. As soon as my hand moves it, it goes from an object from at rest to in motion. After it collides with the wall, it is another example of an unbalanced force because it was moving at a constant velocity until it hit another unbalanced force, which is why the soccer ball is a great example of Newton's first law. Acceleration is dependent on F net and mass. If the forces are unbalanced, there will be an acceleration.
What is F net?
It is the sum of all the forces acting on an object.
What is the equation for F net?
F net equals mass times acceleration. So, the acceleration of an object is dependent on two things: the net force acting on the object as well as the mass of the object.
Any other information on Newton's second law?
Yes. Acceleration is directly proportional to net force, and acceleration is inversely proportional to mass. So, as the mass of an object goes up, the acceleration goes down. And as the net force goes up, so does the acceleration.
What are action-reaction pairs?
All forces exist as pairs. One force is called an action force, and another is called the reaction force.
What are equal and opposite forces?
Well, Maddie, all forces are equal in magnitude, but opposite in direction.
Why don't those action-reaction forces cancel each other out?
They don't cancel each other out because neither force can exist without the other force.
An example Good to know.
Newton's third law. Oscar, shh, sit, shh, sit, sit. Good boy. As Oscar sits on the ground, Oscar's body pushes down on the ground. But as Oscar sits on the ground pushes up on Oscar, making him a great example of Newton's third law.
Good boy.
The angle that produces the greatest range and the greatest time in the air is 45 degrees. Factors that affect the projectile path is the type of projectile, the object, whether it's in free fall or a trajectory path, the mass of the object, and the angle and initial velocity. Gravity does not affect the horizontally launched projectile. The independent nature of horizontal movement and vertical movement occur at the same time and are independent of each other, so they must be discussed separately. There is a horizontal velocity which is not affected by gravity, and a vertical velocity which is affected by gravity.
This unicorn is about to be horizontally launched across the half wall. Yes, that is a horizontally launched Fredkin. As the tennis player hits the racket at a certain angle to get the ball to go a certain distance across the field, a use of projectile motion happens. Without the use of certain angles in the tennis ball, the balls would not go to desired places and the game would not be played like it is today. So that is why tennis is an example of projectile motion.